خير. صباح الخير الكل سامعني.
صباح النور دكتور، ها كل الزميل.
صوت واضح دكتور. صباح النور.
عافية. على الفيسبوك كمان كل شيء تمام محمد؟ على الفيسبوك الكل شايفني ولا لا؟ اوكي، اذا الكل شايف. يعني احنا we are broadcasting on Zoom. I know the maximum capacity of my Zoom is 100 participants. So I am broadcasting on Facebook. So anybody who cannot get into Zoom, he can join through live streaming on Facebook. Also, at the end of this lecture, I'm going to post it on e-learning as well. It is now recording. Good morning. My name is Dr. Ziad Elnasser. I am part of a team that is going to teach you the general microbiology course. We are going to have 2 lectures per week on Sunday and Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. and a lab on Thursday, the same time at 9:30 a.m. This week we are not going to have a lab, so we will start by next Thursday. My group that are going to teach you the microbiology course of me, and I am the course coordinator, and also Dr. Nasser Al-Qoblan and Dr. Rakan Al-Hamad, the same group that we used to teach you the immunology course. Also, we have a teaching assistant. She is one of our residents in the microbiology. She is going to help us in the microbiology lab as well. This is
دكتور بعد إذنك.
تفضل.
دكتور، صوتك من الفصل الماضي صراحة يعني في كثير مشاكل من ناحية إنه الصوت كثير واطي. تمام. يعني لو انك تقرب الميكروفون لعند مصدر الصوت للحنجره او للتم، ويعني هذا بتكون كثير افضل. يعني فعليا هلا احنا معلين الصوت على الاخر وفعليا الصوت مو عالي بالمره.
هيك منيح؟
هيك منيح، بس يا ريت لو اعلى شوي. الله يرضى عنك.
حاضر ولا يهمك.
شكرا جزيلا.
الله يهمك، انا صوتي عالي. شايفين؟ I am the course coordinator of this course. This is an introductory course in general and medical microbiology for medical students, as well as for anybody in the health sciences, dental students, nursing students, pharmacy students, anybody who is going to have a general introductory course in microbiology. The main goal of this course is to prepare the students to understand the systemic microbiology of the modules. So when we go into the modules in microbiology of the respiratory system, microbiology of the gastrointestinal tract, the central nervous system, you will understand the basic concepts. It's going to cover basic principles of bacteriology. We'll talk about bacteria. Virology, we'll talk about viruses, general concepts. Mycology, we'll talk about fungi. And also we'll talk about basic immunology, the one that you already took last summer. So it's going to be a piece of cake for you, as well as a simple parasitology, which talks about some of the protozoa, as well as the worms in general. Also, it covers basic concepts of infection control in general. We will talk about significance of infection control, sterilization, and disinfection. We'll talk also about antibiotics. What are these agents, their mechanism of action, their spectrum, and also we will talk about diagnostic microbiology that involves how we collect specimens and how we send them into the clinical microbiology lab in order to identify the organisms. Finally, the course covers basic concepts of immunology. As I said, the laboratory part will cover basic techniques in microbiology. The textbook that we are going to use, it's called the Microbiology for the Health Sciences, the last edition. And the last edition is the 11th edition, and I have a picture for that in just a second. We are going to have two exams based on the online strategy. The first one is going to be worth 50% of your grade, and the final exam that's going also to cover the rest of the 50% of your grade. And of course, these exams are going to be held on campus. So we are not going to have the exams as we used to do in the last course. So this is the new strategy of the Ministry of Higher Education, as well as all universities. All exams are going to be held on campus rather than at home. The methods of instruction is going to be 2 lectures per week and 1 lab. And we will be using Zoom and Facebook online lecturing till the end of this course. This is the main syllabus of the course. The first 2 lectures this week will cover the introductory part, and then we'll talk more about the scope of microbiology and microscopy next Tuesday. Then the rest of the topics, as you can see, basic concepts of microbiology, some epidemiology, infection control, and general concepts of infectious diseases and so on. And of course, the last part is going to be the immunology part that you already has covered last semester. This is the book that we are going to use. This is the last edition of the Microbiology for the Health Sciences by Paul Engerlich and Janet Dubin, and the Engelkerk and his wife, it seems, and Robert Fadger. And those are, I think, they are professors at Baylor College of Medicine. And this book is very popular all over the world. It really covers the basic concepts of microbiology from the medical aspect point of view, which is extremely important to know. Today's main objectives, we will start with the main objectives as you know. The main objectives of today's class, at the end of this lecture, we will define what's microbiology in general, what do we mean by a pathogen. All these terminology is extremely important for you to know in order to understand what I'm going to talk about. And what do we mean by an opportunistic infection? I'm sure that most of you, they know these terms from the immunology course, but we will emphasize on those in more details. We will differentiate between what do we mean by the acellular microbes and the microorganisms, and the cellular, of course, microorganisms. And we will give you some examples of the acellular, like viruses, prions. They don't have a structure of a cell, for example, compared to bacteria, protozoa, fungi, for example, that they do have the structure of a cell. And also, we will list several reasons why microbes are important. In general, like for example, they produce antibiotics. They are so important in our ecology. We'll talk about that in just a second. The recirculation of carbon, nitrogen, and so on. And we will explain the relationship between microbes and infectious diseases. And we will see that the percentage of those microbes that are associated with disease are extremely low, less than 3% of the microorganisms that are present on the surface of our planet are associated with disease. 97%, they are not. They are so important for our well-being and our survival, as we are going to see. We will differentiate between what do we mean by an infectious disease, a disease, an organism, نسميه احنا pathogen, enters your body, causes a disease. This is what we call an infectious disease, compared to what we call intoxications. Intoxication, products of the microbes, like a toxin, you will get that through food, through water, for example. You will be intoxicated, that you will take the virulent factors that these organisms are going to produce. And we will then talk about some of the history of microbiology. We will talk about some of the pioneers, like the father of microbiology. His name is Anton Leeuwenhoek. This is the first man who saw microorganisms. We'll talk about him in just a second. Louis Pasteur, who really contributed to the science of microbiology. We say the golden age of microbiology. Robert Koch as well, and what are their contributions. And you should know these big names, what are their contributions, so you will understand how the science of microbiology has developed over the years. We will differentiate between what do we mean by biogenesis and abiogenesis. Biogenesis, and a theory of spontaneous generation. And they used to think that life comes from life, or abiogenesis, اللي هي spontaneous generation, that life comes from a non-living object. I mean, they used to see مثلا a piece of cheese, and then they see a worm will be coming out of that cheese. So they thought at that time that life could come from a non-living. وهذه اللي سموها abiogenesis. هاي كانت theory then at the golden age of microbiology, Louis Pasteur and so on, they proved that life must come from a pre-existing of life. And what they see, a worm coming from a cheese, for example, usually has a larva or an egg, for example, that will produce that. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then we will outline Koch's postulate. Any other Koch postulated a theory how infectious diseases can be produced, and you should follow this postulate in order to prove that an organism is responsible for causing a disease. And also, we will talk about some of the exceptions to Koch postulates that might not apply, as we are going to see. And we will discuss two medically related fields of microbiology. We will see that we have so many different fields of microbiology. Maybe the ones that we are concerned about are the medical microbiology, and microbiology related to human beings and diseases, and the clinical microbiology. We mean by that the laboratory part and isolating the microbes that are associated with infectious diseases. So what do we mean by microbiology then? Micro, it means very small, that we need a microscope in order to view that. Bio, it means living, logy, science. So the science of studying a very small living objects like bacteria, viruses, protozoa, fungi. Most of these we don't see on our naked eye, so we need the microscope or an electron microscope, for example, to see viruses and so on. And we will be talking about those microorganisms. You have to know that we are going to talk about what we mean by bacteria, algae, اللي هي الطحالب, and you know the algae rarely is associated with disease, but sometimes could be associated with intoxication. Protozoa, اللي هي وحيدة الخلية, and the most important protozoa that you need to know is the malaria, Plasmodium malaria, the one that causes malaria, protozoa, Internida histolytica, and so on. We will talk about those, and we will see that bacteria, algae, and protozoa, for example, algae, protozoa, they form a complete cell. Maybe bacteria, it has a genetic material we call prokaryotes. We'll talk about those later. Doesn't have a nucleus, for example, compared to others, like fungi. Viruses, it doesn't have a shape of a cell, only genetic material, DNA or RNA, surrounded by a protein shell. And as I said, the word pathogens, we mean by that just the organisms that are associated with disease. So when I say this organism is pathogenic, that it is capable of causing a disease. And as I said, it just forms around 3% of all microorganisms on the surface of our planet. Yani, that means that 97% of all microorganisms that are circulating around, they are non-pathogens. So when we talk about non-pathogens, that means we do have microbes on the surface of our bodies, within our bodies, and you know, when we talked about that before, what is the commonest organ in our body that has microbes, that we call it endogenous microflora? It is the gastrointestinal tract, and 1 gram of stool contains around 10 to the power 9 to 10 to the power 10 microorganisms per 1 gram of stool. Half the weight of our stool, is formed of microorganisms. Soil, it's present all over, and it's so important, the presence of microorganisms on soil in order to recirculate carbon and nitrogen, and carbon fixation, nitrogen fixation, recirculation. It is extremely important. Those endogenous microflora, as long as they are present in their allocated areas in our body, like in the GI tract, in the oral cavity, for example, the vagina, and on our skin and so on, they can provide extreme benefit to our body. The most important thing is a prevention of attachment of pathogens, and they protect us against infectious disease, and we should keep them as they are. And you have to remember that the #1 enemy for this normal flora is to kill them with antibiotics. So if we abuse antibiotics and give, for example, antibiotics for diseases that are not caused by bacteria, like common cold, like corona, influenza, and so on, those are viruses. They do not respond to antibiotics. So if we use antibiotics here indiscriminately, we will kill the normal flora, and they are going to be replaced with resistant organisms that are going to be associated with disease. So these normal flora, as long as they are present in their allocated areas, they are good. They provide us with vitamins, minerals, and so on, and we should keep them this way. And we will talk more in details how we develop our normal flora. The minute that we are born, we are sterile, and then we start being exposed to microbes. And we should keep them as such. Those, if they go into other areas in our bodies, then especially the sterile areas in our bodies, they could be associated with disease. And those, we call them opportunistic pathogens. And they take the opportunity of causing a disease, especially if our immune system is compromised. Yani in AIDS patients, for example, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, here where our immunity is compromised, then we could die of opportunistic pathogens, yani organisms that usually, normally, they don't cause disease, are not associated with disease, but when our immune system is compromised, yani decreased, then we are going to be exposed to those non-pathogens, opportunistic pathogens. So you have to know the significance here of what do we mean by opportunistic pathogens when our immune system is compromised. What do we mean by an infectious disease? An infectious disease, it's a disease that is caused by a pathogen. So what is a pathogen? مثلا, we isolate in the clinical microbiology lab an organism called Salmonella typhi. This organism causes a disease called typhoid fever. This is an infectious disease. Okay? And so on. When we talk about malaria, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium malariae, it is an infectious disease. Corona, it is an infectious disease. Can be transmitted from one person into another. And this infectious disease, we call it by the name of the organism that is associated with that. Coronavirus causes a pneumonia. So this pneumonia is caused by an infectious or a pathogen. We call it the coronavirus, for example, and so on. So the microbes then that we have talked about, زي ما حكينا, they could be cellular, يعني they have a typical structure of a cell. لما نحكي cell نحكي على nucleus, that has genetic material, chromosomes inside, and then we have a cytoplasm, we have ribosomes, and so on. نسميهم احنا eukaryotic organisms. It is a cell. We see that in protozoa, in fungi, for example, in algae, and the others اللي هم acellular, like viruses, they are formed of just genetic material, يا اما DNA, we call them DNA viruses, or RNA, we call them RNA viruses, but never both. Then the viruses ما فيها DNA or RNA at the same time, either DNA or RNA, surrounded by a protein shell envelope, يعني structure to protect the genetic material. We call it a capsid, and then around those could have what we call an envelope. We'll talk about those later. That has a bilayer of phospholipid, and then we have attachment proteins on their surface. Say they bind to specific receptors that will determine its specificity. We'll talk about those later. And we have what we call prions, and proteinaceous infectious particle. It's just replicating proteins. In proteins, we don't have nucleic material. We have just proteins like mad cow disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy, اللي هو جنون البقر, caused by a prion that has been discovered recently. We'll talk in more details about those. So not all infectious particles are formed of that have genetic material. So prions, just replicating proteins, and we'll talk in details about those. They are acellular, they don't have cells. Our viruses, somebody will say, so they are non-living, and it means that they require a host to replicate. And viruses and the prions, they have to go inside a cell and use their protein machinery apparatus to replicate and then assemble and goes outside. We'll talk more in details about those. The cellular زي ما حكيت لك bacteria اللي بنسميهم احنا prokaryotes يعني primitive nucleus يعني there is no nucleus in here. It's primitive, just genetic material, a chromosome floating in a cytoplasm. This is the general structure of a bacteria. We'll talk about it in more details. And we will talk about the old bacteria that we call it the archaebacteria, the first bacteria that has emerged on the surface of our planet. بنسميهم احنا extremophiles. يعني the first bacteria that has emerged on the surface of our planet, and from there all different life forms has evolved from this archaebacteria, or what we call the extremophile, or the eobacteria. Eo, we mean by that true, the ones that they have true nucleus, that have nuclear membrane, check, nucleolus, and caryosome, and then the cytoplasm, check, and the cytoplasm have granules, ribosomes, and so on, like the algae, the fungi, and the protozoa. And we will talk more in details about those. Our just knowledge يعني as يعني layman people, ناس العاديين, they always talk about microbes from our mothers, مش هيك؟ When we used to play with mud and so on, كانت تحكي لنا our mother, as you can see here, don't touch that filthy thing, it's covered with germs. Check, go and wash your hands. لما واحد كان يلعب بالطين, playing with mud and so on, our mothers, they used to tell us, go and wash your hands. This is covered with germs, and you could be infected with germs. So our mothers, they knew that mud, soil, it contains lots of microorganisms. Those, they could be pathogens. Check, صح, البلك, they are non-pathogens, but they could be pathogenic. So those are just a general overview of what we are going to talk about, yani algae, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and viruses, and some examples of those. Now the students, they keep asking me all the time, are we going to remember all of these names that are present here? Do we need to memorize them? Like for example, here we talk about certain types of algae. Maybe here you don't have names, but bacteria, for example, and infectious diseases, pathogens, anthrax, bacillus anthracis, botulism, مثلا clostridium botulinum, cholera. يعني في names of infectious diseases, and here are names of microorganisms that are going to cause. Maybe at this stage here, you don't have, but at the end of this course and then in the modules and so on, you are going to remember all of those. So you will remember those examples in the context of their usage. Legionnaire's disease, leprosy, مرض الجذام, Lyme's disease, meningitis, plague, مرض الطاعون, pneumonia, التهاب الرئة caused مثلا by coronavirus, influenza, مثلا strep and so on, spotted fever, scarlet fever, حمى القرمزية, rickettsiosis, staph, strep, كلها different names that we are going to talk about, and we are going to use those as the vocabulary in medicine to describe disease. So always the students tell me, do we need to remember the names of microorganisms that are associated with disease? And the answer to that, yes, of course. You are going to be a physician, check. You are going to remember the names of bones, muscles, nerves, and so on, different tissues to describe the disease process. And this is exactly the same. You need to describe, how are you going to describe, for example, the disease cholera, if you don't remember the name of the organism, Vibrio cholera, for for example, or the disease smallpox, مرض الجدري. If you don't know about this, the pox, or corona, check nowadays everybody talks about corona. How we are going to know or talk about the corona disease if we do not talk about the name of the coronavirus, COVID-19, for example, and so on. Fungi, مثلا associated with allergy, cryptococcosis, histoplasmosis, and so on, protozoa, شايفين on all of these different diseases يعني associated with protozoa. وviruses, AIDS, bird flu, corona, طبعا, yellow fever, different names of viruses you are going to remember as time comes. يعني when we talk about malaria here in protozoa, at least يعني you should know that malaria is caused by a protozoa. The name of this protozoa, for example, is Plasmodium. So you should know that Plasmodium causes the disease called malaria with different species and so on. SARS, شايفين, severe acute respiratory SARS, COVID-19, for example, check, COVID-19 causes coronavirus pneumonia, and so on. It is extremely important now to talk about the significance of these microbes on the surface of our planet. And always we keep talking about how old is our planet. قديش عمر الكرة الأرضية. You will see that the age of our planet is around 4.5 billion years. The first billion year, the Earth planet was too hot, so no life of any form was present on the surface of this planet. And after 1 billion years, then life started to emerge on this planet by, of course, the production of nucleic materials, the DNA, and so on. مثلا, and then first bacteria has emerged. We will talk more about that. It's called the archaebacteria. It is part of what we call the extremophiles. And they found those microorganisms till now that are present in extreme environmental conditions. Can you imagine a bacteria lives near volcanoes? Bacteria بتعيش عند البراكين, for example, temperature over 100 degrees centigrade, for example, or bacteria that survives in the Dead Sea. ليش سموه Dead Sea? Check, because no life form is present. Nowadays we know that we have bacteria that survives in the Dead Sea, سميها halophile, that can survive the increased concentration of salinity or high salt concentration, and so on. We'll talk in details about those. And of course, we believe that this first microorganism, we have archaebacteria, that comes from the extremophiles in extreme environmental conditions, started to evolve, as you know, and to develop the rest of the microorganisms. It started with the prokaryotes, I mean, no nucleus, and then after that into the eukaryotes with the true nucleus, and then microorganisms start to evolve from that, fungi, and then plants, and then mammalians, and so on. And you can see that animals, for example, they have around 800 to 900 million years of age, عمرهم. Humans, يعني in our form, اللي هو Homo sapiens, شايفين humans, قديش فكركم عمر الهيومنز of قديش حوالي يعني science proves that humans were not present before 100 to 150,000 years. يعني عمر الإنسان على سطح الكرة الأرضية فقط 150,000 سنة. Only 100 ل 150,000. يعني before that, تخيلوا يعني عمر الكرة الأرضية 4.5 billion years of age. احنا our presence on the surface of our planet from 100 to 150,000 years only. We were not present before, and we will see that microorganisms are going to stay, and we are going to leave. Insects and so on, they were present before us, and they are going to stay after we leave, and so on. So it's extremely important to see this evolutionary background. And you will see that the science of microbiology is a new science. يعني قديش عمر science of microbiology do you think? It's just simply 100 to 150 years of age. عمر الميكروبيولوجي يعني قبل 150 سنة nobody knew anything that we do have microbes on the surface of our planet that they used to cause disease. This is extremely important to know. إنه الإنسان عرف that we have diseases caused by pathogens فقط 100 to 150 years of age. هلا راح تشوفوا عن history of microbiology at the golden age of microbiology اللي هو at the end of the 19th century في نهاية القرن التاسع عشر, where people they start to know that we do have microbes that are associated with disease. And what does that mean? This is extremely important to know. It means that when humans or animals, they used to be infected with a pathogen, nobody knew anything that this patient is infected with a microorganism. They used to think of an extraordinary forces that usually comes from force, goes into that particular human and inflict injury and cause disease. And many diseases, by the way, they are still caused by this concept. Like, for example, influenza. Influenza, it comes, the word influenza, from the word influence. Influence, they used to think that certain setup of stars in the sky could affect people that are living on Earth. Till now, يعني many people تعرفوا لسه بيفكروا بالأبراج وتأثير الأبراج وبرج الأسد وبرج and so on, وإنه certain setup of these stars could affect people that are living on Earth. Until now, still people believe that these diseases are caused by evil spirits. And for example, some people that they used to get infectious diseases, get encephalitis, change of personality, and so on. Psychiatric illnesses, they used to be burnt. كانوا dark ages في العصور الوسطى and so on. They used to tie them on trees and so on, and they used to burn them. كانوا يعتقدوا إنه هذول فيهم أرواح شريرة, evil spirits, and they used to kill them. مثلا the science of psychiatry is just less than 80 years of age. And anybody who gets a psychiatric illness, which is a major branch of medicine nowadays, and we know a lot about psychiatric illnesses and their etiologies and so on, and how people they get affected by those diseases, the genetic factors that are involved and so on. And many people, they still that we have evil spirits invade our body and then make us act as what we are. So our knowledge in microbiology has really enlightened us here to have a better life, to make a better diagnosis of diseases. راح تشوفوا انتوا as physicians, your main goal is to make a diagnosis of an infectious disease, and then to start a treatment plan and to prevent. I mean, prevention here by vaccines, for example, as we can see, antibiotics, antiviral agents, as they are doing now for corona, and what they did for influenza, for example. They have very effective medications and vaccines for influenza. By the way, now is the season for the vaccination of influenza between October and December, and we encourage all students and so on to get a vaccine, especially those that they are going to go into a hospital setup. Vaccination, we'll talk in more details about vaccines and so on. So it is so important to understand the science of microbiology, history of microbiology, and how this disease has evolved to understand how we make a diagnosis of infectious diseases and how to treat and prevent infectious diseases and so on. So here, for example, we were talking about 97% of microorganisms are present in the environment, in soil. نحكي احنا دائما microorganisms are ubiquitous. يعني ubiquitous, we mean by that they are everywhere. صح, they are present in soil, they could be present in the air, in water, within our bodies, on the surface of our bodies, in animals, and so on. يعني in animals, microorganisms that are present in their gastrointestinal tract are so important for the well-being of those animals, الحيوانات المجترة, rumen, يعني these organisms that are present in their gastrointestinal tract are so important for their survival. You see, for example, زي ما حكيت أنا إنه microorganisms are present in soil. هدول we call them saprophytes. Saprophytes, يعني هدول they desiccate and they analyze all organic compounds into their simpler form. And imagine a world without microorganisms or bacteria, then we are not going to have a circulation. يعني احنا when we die, we are formed of proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and carbon, and then we are going to be analyzed, desiccated in soil by these microorganisms in soil and the ones that are present on us. Then we are going to recirculate, as we are going to see with the saprophytes. The saprophytes, اللي هم البكتيريا that's present in soil that they help in the circulation. They take our organic material, plants, animals, and so on, humans that they die and so on, and then analyze those into simpler forms, nitrate, phosphate, sulfate. كل هذا it happens in soil. Ammonia, carbon dioxide, water, and other chemicals that are going to be taken by other forms of life. Macromolecules are going to be broken into micromolecules, and they are going to be used by other microorganisms, other animals, and so on, as you are going to see. مثلا, in the roots of plants, في bacteria that's present in the legumes, it fixes nitrogen. شوف, nitrogen gas in the air, في nitrogen fixing bacteria present in the legumes. والlegumes present the roots, تعرفوا زي الكستنة، الفقوع، الأشياء هي فستق، كلهم present يعني in the roots of plants. عشان هيك they are rich in protein. They fix nitrogen, and then they produce from nitrogen ammonia, and then nitrate in soil, and then nitrogen will go back into the air, and we keep recycling, as you can see. So all the proteins that they come from animals, including humans, are going to be disintegrated by the saprophytes, bacteria that's present in the soil, and they help in cycling of the carbon as well as the nitrogen. هون بحكي على النيتروجين cycle. يعني الcarbon that are present, for example, in proteins as well as in carbohydrates and so on, is going to recycle from bigger molecules to smaller molecules. رح نحكي عنهم هدول في الميتابوليزم catalysm, catabolism and anabolism, اللي هو metabolism يعني metabolize, and we will see how these things are going to take place. يعني الامونيا that will develop here from plants and so on زي ما حكينا will form the nitrogen that will help. عشان هيك يعني لما نحكي على rich soil نحكي التربة الغنية, this is the soil that contains lots of microorganisms. So when we die, if we get buried in a rich soil, then we are going to get analyzed faster. check كل يعني كل ما كانت التربة مثلا it has more microorganisms, then we are going to recirculate مش هيك and going back into plants, into bacteria, worms and so on in the soil, and then we will keep recirculating. But if we get buried in the desert or in the Dead Sea, what's going to happen? In the Dead Sea, lots of salt, مش هيك في desert environmental conditions doesn't help microbes يعني to survive. So we will not going to be analyzed. There is no saprophytic bacteria, and we could stay يعني زي كأنه تحنطنا here for a longer period of time. So people, they think that يعني, and they have found by the way many bodies buried in the near the Dead Sea that they have not changed because we don't have bacteria in that particular part. So all of us are going to be analyzed as long as, and this integrated by saprophytic bacteria, as long as here the soil contains rich microorganisms. And remember that normal soil contains around 10 to the power 9 microorganisms per 1 gram of soil. واحنا لما نزبل التربه في الزراعه and so on, what do we do؟ شكل نجيب الزبل بتاع الحيوانات that contains lots of spores, microbes and so on عشان in order to make the soil more rich and to get more ammonia, nitrate and to help in the production of nutrients and recirculation and so on. So remember that the saprophytes is so important for the soil fertilization. خصوبة التربة has to do with the saprophytes. Remember that all of those organic material, when they get analyzed, they produce nitrate, phosphate, carbon dioxide, and water. And carbon dioxide that's produced already from the organic material that got disintegrated. عشان هيك everything that is going to recycle is going to be good. عشان هيك يعني organic compounds that are degradable much better for the recycling compared to the non-degradable material. يعني البلاستيك مثلا مش هيك plastic and so on, they are non-degradable, so they stay in the environment for a longer period of time. وهلا بتعرفوا كيف صاروا يعملوا كل الانفلوبس and so on they are degradable in order to recycle. تذكروا the nitrogen fixing bacteria that's present in the legumes of plants, those they fix in nitrogen وبيعملوا الامونيا والنيترate and so on. They help in the recirculation of nitrogen cycle. It is so important here when we talk about microorganisms to talk about how those pathogens are going to be transmitted. Very important to know each microorganism from the pathogens mode of transmission. Coronavirus transmitted through droplets into the respiratory tract. Check. Viruses, they infect living cells. Check. They multiply within a cell, then they come back or out of those. يعني it was extremely funny. يمكن كنتوا تشوفوا على التلفزيون and so on about the burial sites of the corona diseased patients and so on. And always we say that diseased people, they don't transmit viruses. الواحد يموت doesn't transmit viruses. يكون contaminated. مظبوط. People that they want to deal with these viruses, they have to follow كل protective measures, gloves, shake, masks, and washing hands and so on. A disease has to be sterilized with مثلا chlorine and so on, and then we bury those into soil in order to recycle. يعني viruses, they are not going to jump from soil and going into your respiratory tract. مش احنا humans living that we transmit those diseases. So يعني I see رأيي الشخصي that we don't need يعني to put هدول المرضى مثلا في special cemeteries, مقابر خاصة, ونستخدم كل هال protective measures, شيد وما شيد and so on. I don't think this is logical in the transmission of these coronavirus, especially هدول viruses. They are enveloped viruses and easily can be disintegrated by exposure to sunlight or any mild antiseptic like chlorine, alcohol, and so on. So if you wear masks, زي ما حكينا, wash your hands, تباعد اجتماعي, because people when they talk they transmit the virus. Dead people, they don't talk, shake, so they don't transmit these viruses. We touch them, check, we wash our hands, they go, and they don't jump into our respiratory tract. We put our hands into our respiratory tract, for example, and so on. So the transmission, when we understand how organisms they are transmitted, then we are going to interfere with their transmission. Very, very important to know كل organism how it is transmitted. لما نحكي على typhoid fever, is transmitted through the gastrointestinal tract. Coronavirus through the respiratory tract. Vibrio cholera through the GI tract, and so on. كل organism, HIV virus through sexual intercourse, for example, through hepatitis B virus through, for example, sexual intercourse, blood, and so on. AIDS through sexual intercourse, blood products, and so on. فعشان هيك كل organism you should know here how it is going to be transmitted and the safety measures. Now, corona comes from respiratory tract, check, so we have to wear mask. If you wear a mask, مثلا, both of you, chance of transmission approaches to zero. Anything that could come out from there comes through very small dosage اللي احنا بنسميها infectious dose. بنحكي على coronavirus, infectious dose around 1,000 particles, and you have to get a minimum of 1,000 particles to be infected. Check. هذه بنسميها احنا infectious dose. When you wear a mask, a chance انك انت to spread 1,000 virus particles is extremely rare. If, for example, you spread 100, 200, this is really good. Other person could have it. تصير هون عندنا ما يسمى بالherd immunity أو ما يسمى بالمناعة المجتمعية أو مناعة القطيع, and so on, as long as you are immune competent. But if you are severely immune compromised, مثلا you are taking steroids, cancer, chemotherapy, and so on, هون بتصير أنت a threat to others. هدول الناس اللي لازم ينحجروا, مش هيك؟ Those are the ones that we are afraid to transmit the virus into them. Very important to understand. Immune compromised people, هدول اللي لازم احنا to take good care of them. check. While مثلا young people, طلاب الجامعات and so on, those they are highly immune competent, مناعتهم قوية and so on. هدول أقل الناس الإصابة بالأمراض, as simple as that. فده راح تشوفوا كيف راح نحكي later what is the balance between how people they do get infected. شو اللي بيحدد محددات إن أنصاب with an infectious disease or not. راح تشوفوا number of microorganisms that enter your body, هاي اللي بنسميها infectious dose. كل organism له infectious dose. حكينا بالكورونا around 1,000 multiplied by virulent factors, شو weapons that this virus is having in order to inflict injury, divided by the host factor اللي هو your immune status. If you are immune competent, you got small dose of microorganisms, then you are not going to be infected, and vice versa. Remember this equation, we will talk about it about how organisms they are transmitted, how people they do get infected, and what is our safety measure to break the cycle of infection. نقطع سلسلة العدوى نحكوها. Very very important. وهنا كنا نحكي على السايكلينج ونشوف كيف الفود تشين، وزي ما حكينا يعني يعني كيف السمك الكبير باكل السمك الصغير مش هيك، والسمك الصغير and so on and things will go into our body and راح نحكي على الكاتابوليزم والانابوليزم and how we build up our tissues and so on, our immune cells and so on. The same thing happens in microorganisms. وحكينا في saprophytic bacteria. Everything recycles. Remember that when we die, we are going to recycle. راح تاكلنا other microorganisms, مش هيك؟ Plants and so on. Our carbon is going to form carbon dioxide. The photosynthesis will go into the air. It will be fixed by other trees, مش هيك؟ Plants. وبصير في anabolism, carbohydrates, proteins, nitrogen fixing, carbon fixing. We will keep recycling. It's extremely important. عشان هيك many people all over the world they believe that life is so precious. الهنود هذول البوذيين and so on بيآمنوا انه الحياة is so precious، وكل واحد فينا الروح تاعه تنتقل، هيك بيؤمنوا هم هذول، تنتقل من كائن إلى آخر and so on. It's really interesting. يعني انت if you think about it, يعني theoretically here with the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, everything is going to be formed from something else. We are going to keep recycling. عشان هيك saprophytes, rich soil will help in the recycling process here. When we eat, we recycle. Check and so on. طبعا humans, nobody eats humans unless they die. Check and then we are going to recycle. It's extremely interesting. We will see that microorganisms, they are not just playing a major role in the recycling, the saprophytes, shake, nitrogen and carbon, but also in the production of food. احنا on a daily basis and we eat food that is made by microorganisms. زي ايش مثلا most common food اللي احنا بناكله مثلا like yogurt, اللبن. check اللبن yogurt is made by acidophilic bacteria, lactobacillus acidophilus. لما نعمل اللبن يعني if you ask your mother how she makes yogurt, شيك بتجيب الحليب she warm it up شيك لدرجة حرارة حوالي يعني 35 to 40 degrees centigrade، وبعدين بتحط عليه الروبع. يعني ايش هي الروبع؟ عبارة عن just simply yogurt that contains a high concentration of lactobacillus acidophilus. البكتيريا اللي it takes lactose sugar from the milk converted into lactic acid فبصير طعمه حامض، مش هيك؟ بعطينا لبن and so on. راح نشوفوا كل منتجات الألبان they are made of microorganisms. زي مثلا acidophilic milk المخيط والشنينة، مثلا الخبز شيك الخبز bread here yeast that's going to make it fluffy and so on, buttermilk, chocolate, coffee. تخيلوا في أنواع من الكوفي will be fermented by microorganisms. بعتقد في حيوان اسمه سيج هذا it eats the coffee beans and then they go back in the stool of those, so it gets fermented in the GI tract of this bird while they collect that. يعني انتم جوجل ات رح تشوفوا، نسيت اسم القهوه يعني سيج اعتقد. they take it يعني تخيلوا piece by piece and they sell it. ببيعوا الكيلو بحوالي $1000. يعني بعطيك very good taste. So this coffee is get fermented in the GI tract of those birds by microorganisms and so on. It's really interesting يعني to know. شوفوا معظم انواع التشيزز، انواع الجبنه سويس تشيز مثلا تشيدر تشيز، كلهم هذول ريليتد للمايكرو اورجانيزمز that are present. الفينيجر شكل الخل، محل موسم العنب الناس بيعملوه فينيجر، بيحطوا اسيتوباكتر يعني البكتيريا that takes the glucose sugar and convert that into acetic acid فبصير حامض مثلا and so on. Swiss cheese كلهم هدول المخللات المخلقات and so on. حتى المشروبات الروحيه مش alcoholic beverages البير براندي سيك، هذا طبعا it depends على نوع النيوترينت that gets fermented. مثلا هذا الساكي in Japanese مكتوب في الرايس wine from yogurt and so on. sherry vodka whiskey wine كله هذا it is made by microorganisms. chemicals حكينا acetic acid acetone butanol citric acid ethanol كله هذا كمان bacteria can make it. أهم شيء to know that microorganisms they make antibiotics. يعني microorganisms they use antibiotics to compete with others for survival. فشوفوا مثلا أنفوتيريسين بي باسيتريسين سيفالوسبورين كلورامفينيكول سايكلوهكساميد and so on and penicillin cephalosporin هذول they come out from fungi and so on. So microorganisms they are excellent source of antibiotics. صح في عندنا synthetic antibiotics you will see, but the best source here they are from natural here microorganisms they make them in labs. شايفين هاي مثلا Swiss cheese هذا الفراغ هون this is carbon dioxide related to the fermentation الجبنة السويسرية. وشوفوا هاي كمان اللي هي بيحكوا عنها الجبنة المعفنة مش هيك this is يعني fungi وكمان هاي provides us with good source of vitamin B12 and many other nutrients. The blue veins seen in blue cheese are caused by a mold اللي هو عفن هذا in the genus Penicillium. شايفين طبعا هذا doesn't cause disease at all. واحد اكل جبنه معفنه you have to know what if this can cause disease or not. Penicillium doesn't cause disease. It can provide you with vitamins and minerals as well. So عشان هيك they're very good to your health. Remember that microorganisms we can use them in food industry. شايفين هاي لما كنا نحكي هون على infectious diseases يعني disease that is caused by a pathogen أو intoxication. Disease that's caused by the products of a microorganism. الفروقات بينهم a pathogen colonizes a person's body. أهم شيء بالinfectious process a pathogen enters to your body binds to a specific receptor in your body and then inflict an injury. It depends on each مثلا corona it has to bind to receptors in the respiratory tract and then enters in. If you don't have that receptor مثلا children and adults يعني the amount of receptor for the corona is much less. رح نحكي عنه هذا later compared to old people that the receptor for example concentration is much higher so it can infect and affect يعني old people much more than younger people. The pathogen causes a disease through its virulent factors. This type of disease is known as an infectious disease. Example مثلا MRSA methicillin resistant staph aureus, gas gangrene, Clostridium perfringens. رح نحكي عن lots of diseases caused by microbes. Intoxications, you take the products of the pathogen. A pathogen produces a toxin in vitro, يعني outside the human body. A person ingests the toxin causes a disease. هذا بنسميه احنا intoxication. This type of disease is known as microbial intoxication. زي مثلا staphylococcus food poisoning. رح نحكي عنه هذا. الشباب بيجهزوا لرحله هيك وماخذين مثلا بوتيتو سالز او شغلات contaminated with microorganisms. اثناء التحضير 4-5 ساعات مثلا تلاقي an exotoxin produced by Staphylococcus aureus صار في الفود، انت بتاكل التوكسين هذا وبيعمل لك vomiting and diarrhea and so on. staphylococcus food poisoning, food botulism مثلا العلب المعلبات اللي could be infected with Clostridium botulinum and so on. We'll talk more about those later. فحكينا اذا الميكروبيولوجي يعني as bacteriology or mycology, phycology, protozoology, prions and so on. هذول كلهم associated with disease. راح نحكي عنهم اهم شيء احنا بنحكي على pathogens في البكتيريولوجي. phycology algae يعني algaeology يعني هذول present in water شوفوهم هذول اللي very rich in the production يعني they have chlorophyll algae and they produce oxygen. فيعني the richest source of oxygen on the surface of our planet comes from algae, rarely associated with disease, but some they could produce toxins راح نحكي عنهم later. Mycology, science of fungi, وكمان نفس الشيء هدول not that many associated with disease وراح نحكي عنهم هدول associated with disease when the patient is immune compromised. تذكروا هاي المعلومة يعني when patients are immune compromised يعني مثلا a patient واحد عمره مثلا 25 years of age that is having candida albicans اللي هي yeast in his tongue مثلا or in his oral cavity. This patient is having AIDS until proved otherwise. تخيلوا يعني مريض عمره 25 سنة عنده sexual promiscuity أو took a blood transfusion or whatever وصار عنده candida in his oral cavity يعني by definition هذا المريض عنده AIDS حتى يثبت العكس. بعدين ما نعمل isolation of the HIV virus and so on. راح نحكي in details about that. Protozoology, virology, prions and viroids. Viroids اللي هي عبارة عن فقط يعني nucleic acid RNA nucleic acid يعني they cause infection to plants مش بالهيومنز. they go into plants بيعملوا disease in plants زي الفيروسز ولكن فقط RNA و they have a protective protein shell only. طبعا في الميكروبيولوجي راح نشوف في تخصصات كثيرة في الميكروبيولوجي يعني general microbiology مثلا هدول they deal with bacteria as a biological system and study that here as a biological system. Medical زينا احنا مثلا medical microbiologists those are the ones that they study bacteria that is associated with disease سميهم medical microbiologists. and clinical microbiologists clinical يعني related to hospital setup. بحكي clinical microbiology lab هو a lab that isolates microbes from patients, identify them وبنعمل diagnosis of infectious disease. فأهم two specialists here for us يعني as people working in the medical profession اللي هو medical microbiology and clinical microbiology. Microbiologists that are working in a hospital set up in the clinical microbiology lab in the hospital. Veterinary microbiology هدول اللي بيشتغلوا في الميكروبس that they infect animals زي veterinarians يعني أطباء البيطريين and so on. وهذه they play a major role for our domestic animals الحيوانات والثروة الحيوانية and so on. Agriculture making the soil مش هيك so rich very important. We will see the organisms that is associated with that. Sanitary microbiology here if microbes they contaminate certain areas how we can sanitize or clean that particular area. Industrial microbiology how we can use microbes as a biological factory. نصنع antibiotics to make genetic engineering vaccines for example proteins interferons and so on. هاي نسميها industrial microbiology. Physiology and genetics كيف we use microbes as a genetic unit. وراح تشوفوا كيف لما نحكي على الجينetics of microbes يعني بكتيريا multiplies in general every 10 to 20 minutes يعني average of 15 minutes يعني البكتيريا كل ربع ساعة بتنقسم. This is really interesting to know. So we can study the genetics in a short period of time. بينما for example humans يعني قديش بدهم الهيومنز time to duplicate themselves قديش بدهم البكتيريا ربع ساعة الواحدة بتصير تنتين بصيروا أربعة and so in a short period of time we are going to see how يعني changes could occur on a microorganism while humans animals for example يعني humans on the average they require around 35 years to duplicate. أما واحد يتجوز ويجي ولد أو بنت and so on بده حوالي 35 سنة to duplicate itself. يعني studying genetics in a human it's going to take a longer period of time while studying that on microorganisms is going here to have results in a short period of time. Environmental microbiology, we will see the effect of microbes in the environment. مثلا microbes bacteria we could use it in cleaning مثلا of oil spill يعني بتعرفوا بعض الناقلات النفط and so on sometimes بصير في مثلا accident بصير في oil spill in oceans and so on بحطوا bacteria over there that they will take the oil and convert it into something that doesn't harm the environment. هاي بسموها bioremediation. Bioremediation. And taking the oil and change that into just substances that doesn't harm the environment. Remember that. خلينا نحكي على بعض
دكتور لو سمحت شوي
نعم.
سؤال يعطيك العافية.
أهلين.
بس عشان وقت المحاضرة على 10:30 بيخلص والساعة صارت 11 إلا ربع.
أنا حكيت مين محمد اللي بيحكي معي؟
لا مالك.
مالك. احنا حكينا يعني up to 11 حكوا لي محاضرتكم الثانية على 11:30 فنخليها للساعة 11 بس ربع ساعة نعطيكم بس اوفر ريفيو وبعدين بنكمل نكست تيوزداي. أي ساعة
يعني بس على المحاضرة 10:30 يعني لللكتشر هاي بس ولا لكل اللكتشرز اللي قدام؟
لا اللي بالدار لل10:30 حكينا and we could extend it للساعة 11 إذا ما عليكم محاضرات يعني أنت
يعني هو مبدئيا ما في محاضرات أما الأسابيع الجاية الله أعلم.
يعني زهقت أنت يا مالك؟
لا صراحة مش هيك بس يعني عشان الوقت.
بعرف إذا عليك شغل احنا حكينا مع محمد إنه احنا نضل ل11 لأنه محاضرتكم الثانية ل11:30 معكم كمان نص ساعة.
ما بعرف زي ما بدك دكتور يعطيك الف عافية.
طيب إذا بدكم يعني أوقف ما عندي أي مشكلة. أنا عارف هي ديمقراطية هون هو هذا history يعني احنا بنحكي هون عن history of microbiology and how people they start thinking about microbes. تذكروا احنا حكينا عن أنتون ليفان هوك. هذا هو أنتون ليفان هوك اللي هو الفاذر اوف مايكروبيولوجي أول واحد شاف microbes and reported that into the British Academy of Science. هذا كان بالقرن السابع عشر 1600 وسمثينج. تخيلوا هذا ما كان طبيب ولا عالم ولا شيء كان تاجر فابريك قماش تخيلوا and كان عنده هواية كان عنده يعمل لينسز فكان يعمل لينس عدسات وهو أول واحد عمل simple microscope. شو يعني simple microscope؟ simple microscope just a microscope with one lens حوالي الماجنيفيكيشن حوالي 300 times وهذا صار يجيب just simple جرب هو from his mouth مثلا على البلاك بعض البلاك عند اسنانه and so on وصار يحطها على سلايد ويطلع عليها صار يشوف اشياء بتتحرك. he used to go into brackish water مياه المستنقعات and so on وطلع عليها صار يشوف اشياء بتتحرك ما يشوفها with his naked eye. فاجى سماهم هدول animalcules وحكى انه في animals very small that we cannot see in our naked eye. صار يرسمهم. It's really interesting. طبعا at that time nobody was thinking about that those could be associated with disease. حتى الجولدن ايج اوف مايكروبيولوجي، حتى نهايه القرن التاسع عشر لما اجى لويس باستور، روبرت كوخ، جوزيف ليستر، هدول هم the ones that are the pioneers of the golden age of microbiology. It's really interesting. هذا لويس باستور. حقيقة لويس باستور يعني one of the major pioneers in microbiology. لويس باستور اللي أنشأوا معهد باستور يعني يعني just احتراما و respecting his presence. وهلا هذا باستور انستيتيوت في باريس زي CDC in the United States بيعملوا فيه research and so on. لويس باستور اجى في نهاية القرن التاسع عشر، يعني حقيقة هو one of the major contributors to the golden age of microbiology. Louis Pasteur was not a physician. ما كان طبيب. He was just a chemist. كان يشتغل on fermentation of products. He was the first to classify microorganisms at that time into aerobic and anaerobic, for example. He was the first to make a cure for the wine disease. يعني تعرفوا فرنسا is French is so popular with its wine. كان المشكلة with the wine industry its spoilage. كان يخرب الواين. ليش؟ تعرفوا الواين بيعملوه من العنب and they put the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae اللي بتكون موجودة naturally on the surface of the grapes، وبصير في fermentation and this yeast takes the glucose sugar converted into ethanol. وطبعا because of the wine it adds up the flavors of the grapes into that and so on. لما يعملوا other alcoholic beverages and so on. طبعا الواين it could be contaminated with other microorganisms زي acetobacter, other bacteria بتعمل other products. بتعمل مثلا butyric acid and so on. يعني so many other organic acids that will ruin the taste of wine. فبخرب الواين، ما حدا بيشتريه، مش هيك؟ فاجى شو عمل هو؟ عمل what we call pasteurization. Pasteurization بسترت الواين، وهلا بنستخدمها احنا في pasteurization of milk and so on. We kill only the organisms that are responsible for the contamination and the spoilage of the feed. فاجى هو حكى if we heat الواين during its making to 62 or 63 degrees centigrade for half an hour, بسموه low temperature holding, this is enough to kill the contaminated organisms, but it will not kill the yeast that makes the wine. أو مثلا heating that 72 to 73 degrees centigrade for 15 seconds. وهلا احنا we pasteurize the milk. احنا ما بنغلي الحليب. This is really important to know. We don't boil the milk. We pasteurize the milk. شو يعني we pasteurize the milk؟ شوفوا منتجات الألبان and so on. إذا حدا ناس عندهم يسألوهم how we pasteurize the milk. بيخلوا الحليب يمر in a very narrow tube at 95 degrees centigrade for half a second. تخيلوا half a second مر الحليب. This is enough to kill any pathogens that are contaminating the milk. إذا في بروسيلا، في mycobacteria, any microorganism that could here contaminate the milk. So we pasteurize the milk. We do not boil the milk, because if we boil the milk, we will ruin the milk. كل الفيتامينز proteins and so on. عشان هيك كل العالم بيشرب الحليب بارد مش هيك؟ pasteurized and cold. يمكن احنا هون بنخاف كثير لما نغلي الحليب so till it loses most of its nutrients. So Louis Pasteur was the first home to discover a methods to save the wine industry who invented pasteurization. It's not just that, but also he worked on vaccines. هو أول من start working on vaccines مثلا عمل vaccines لديزيز اسمه فاول كوليرا كان بصير diarrhea هذا بكتيريا causes diarrhea in chicken اسمه فاول كوليرا so he made a vaccines out of that and saved. وهو أول من عمل vaccine for شو اسمه rabies. يعني rabies تخيلوا لويس باستور he was a chemist. هو وجد انه الريبيز when people animals هم طبعا the ones that they get infected with the rabies virus and طبعا infects their central nervous system وبصير animals they will start having change in behavior and so on. So he got their central nervous system, dried them out, and inactivated that and start giving that to other animals, protecting them from rabies. حتى في طفل اسمه مايستر ولساته هذا موجود في الهيستوري of microbiology and history of medicine. اسمه جوزيف مايستر كان عمره 12 سنة was bitten more than 20 times by a rabid dog. rabid يعني كلب مسعور. كان كانوا يعرفوا انه الشخص اذا انعض من كلب مسعور he is dead until prove otherwise. فجابته امه لعند لويس باستور وحكت له اني بدي اخذ المطعوم تبعك. فهو طبعا he was not a physician, not entitled to try his vaccine on humans. وهون عمل ما يسمى ب ethical dilemma. كيف يستخدم شيء not approved. بيحكوا هلا بنعملوا فاكسين شوفوا كم تجارب بيعملوا عليه قبل ما يصير approved by مثلا FDA او JFDA and so on عشان يكون safe for human consumption. فالام وللولد ضلت تترجى بلويس باستور واجا خالف لويس باستور الايثيكال ديليما هاي واعطى الفاكسين هذا لجوزيف مايستر and he got saved. نيجي جوزيف مايستر وصار لويس باستور حقيقة يعني pioneer in making vaccines. وهو عمل كمان فاكسين للأنثراكس كمان وجد الانيمالز used to be infected and they die of anthrax. The same thing يعني vaccinated those with the vaccine that he made and وعمل trial كل الفلاك that took his vaccine saved بينما other flock that didn't take the vaccine died of anthrax مرض الجمرة الخبيثة. So he contributed to the science of microbiology and vaccines in general. كمان he solved the problem of silk industry يعني دودة القز and so on. اكتشف يعني a cure for that particle. وهو he contributed to the golden age of microbiology in what we call here the theory of biogenesis. يعني هو اللي حكى انه life must come from a pre-existing life. Theory of biogenesis negating the previous theory اللي كانت abiogenesis أو theory of spontaneous generation. فtheory of biogenesis اللي هي واحد اسمه فيرتشو هو كان اللي start talking about that before Louis Pasteur, ولكن لويس باستير أكدها theory of biogenesis. وهو the first one who talked about the theory of infectious disease اللي أكدها كوخ، يعني in Koch postulate. فهو اللي حكى إنه microorganisms when they enter into human body or animals, they are pathogens, they are associated with the theory, the germ theory of disease, the germ theory of disease. Certain pathogen enters your body, you are caused by an infectious disease caused by that particular pathogen. It's a germ theory of disease. That germs, they are responsible for those infectious diseases. So Louis Pasteur حقيقة contributed to the science of microbiology and medicine without being a physician. اتذكروا الفاكسينز اللي عملوا الجيرم theory of disease، وكذلك here pasteurization theory and so on. Louis Pasteur, the French scientist. روبرت كوخ. طيب خلينا نوقف هون عند روبرت كوخ، هذا جيرمان ساينتست، بنحكي عنه يوم الثلاثاء وبنكمل وبنحكي عن الميكروسكوبي and how we view المايكرو إذا في حدا عنده أي سؤال I'm really ready to answer. محمد يمكنك تعمل
يعطيك العافية دكتور.
أهلين يا هلا.
تكلمت عن الجبنة العفنة وقلت إنه بها يعني فائدة كلش كبيرة للإنسان من يأكلها.
نعم.
فهل إنه الجبنة العفنة هي نوع خاص من الجبن؟ لو أي جبن ممكن إنه يتعفن يكون مفيد للإنسان؟
لا، هي نوع خاص لازم يكون فيها العفن الخاص اللي هو البنسيليوم. هذا بنسيليوم لأنه في other fungi ممكن تكون مضرة، بتعمل mycotoxins and so on، بس هذا النوع من العفن مفيد للإنسان، produce vitamins وminerals and so on.
شكرا دكتور.
ولا يهمك، والطعم طبعا that is going to be produced. سؤال آخر؟
يعطيك العافية دكتور.
أهلا.
Doctor, when you talked about pathogenicity and the opportunistic infections, you said that people that have immunocompromised systems are more likely to have opportunistic infections. Is that correct?
Yes, the ones that طبعا ضربنا مثل على الايدز، لما نحكي على الايدز patients شيك هذول بيكونوا immune compromised, so they are going to be infected with organisms that usually are not associated with a disease. وراح نحكي عن هدول سواء بكتيريا او fungi, protozoa and so on that they infect AIDS patients, and AIDS patients they will die of these opportunistic infections. So the more you are immune compromised زي ما حكيت the other arm of the equation. هلا بنحكي على الكورونا مش هيك؟ وكل الناس بتحكي على الاميون compromised، وهدول كيف لما يكونوا immune compromised بصيروا more susceptible and they die of corona. وكل واحد هذا عمره 80 سنة عنده أمراض مزمنة، هذا بدخن مش هيك؟ يعني مناعته قليلة so they get infected and they will die of corona. بينما immune competent الشباب مثلا أطفال كذا مناعتهم ممتازة جدا، صح بنقلوا الديزيز ولكن they don't get affected that much. مش هيك؟ نادرا ما طفل يموت في كورونا، ممكن يعني احتمال ولكن قليل جدا. ولكن لما يكون immune compromised يموت، باخذ ادويه ضد السرطان مثلا مش هيك، steroids، عنده any immune deficiency disease, then this patient is going to die of corona. So the opportunistic infections.
So pathogenicity is relative, which means that a microorganism can be pathogenic to one person but harmless to another person, right?
Yeah, right. We will talk about that later, and how people they could be genetically susceptible of being infected with certain microorganisms. راح نحكي على كيف الميكروبكتيريا وال HLA for example here preponderance related to certain diseases and so on. Genetics they play a major role. It's not just in infectivity but also and how you are going to respond to certain medications. أكيد حكوا لكم بالpharmacology and pharmacogenetics that certain people might not respond to certain medications. The same thing here. Certain people, if they are infected with a pathogen, some they could respond, some others they might not respond to that.
تمام شكرا دكتور.
ولا يهمك.
يعطيك العافية دكتور.
أهلا الله يعافيك.
بالنسبة للبايوجينيسيس،
نعم.
أول حياة على كوكب الأرض جات من حياة ثانية ولا؟
يعني أنت you have to read about that. هم بيحكوا على origin of life from the science point of view, that the first molecule that has developed on the surface of our planet was a DNA. Where this DNA has come from مش معروف, from other planets and so on. أنت read about that يعني in science and so on. And then يعني the first cell اللي هي الاركيبكتيريا that has emerged بعد the first billion years that has emerged, and out of this evolution then archibacteria يعني developed, and then fungi, plants, and then يعني خلينا نحكي كده insects. وفي طلعوا في tree of life يعني how the evolution talks about that in science. وبعدين humans has emerged 150,000 years ago فقط زي ما حكيت. وزي ما حكيت يعني insects or other animals were يعني present on the surface of this planet before us, and we will go and they are going to stay. يعني احنا لما تنتهي الحياة على سطح الكرة الأرضية راح نشوف إنه احنا we will go and other forms of life راح يطولوا يروحوا and so on. So يعني this is really very important to understand, and how those microorganisms they play a major role in the development of other or different types of life forms. They think that we share كلياتنا احنا humans مش هيك, plants, microorganisms and so on is the DNA or the nucleic acid, DNA and RNA. كلياته في البلانتس مش هيك, بالانيمالز insects كلهم احنا we share تقريبا. يعني نختلف طبعا in our genetic format, science of genetics and so on, but we share كلياتنا. عشان هيك احنا we can make bacteria to make interferons او مثلا انسولين. شفتوا هلا الانسولين بتعملوا yeast, human insulin. يعني we can insert genetic material, gene اللي بيعمل البرو انسولين into a yeast, وهي اليست بتصير تعملنا insulin. This is really interesting as long as you know the genotype that's going to be reflected on what we call the phenotype, and protein synthesis in a cell. Cells, the viruses for example, they are going to be يعني inert at all as long as they get inside a cell. They use that cell as a factory for their replication. يعني لو الكورونا فيروس ما يفوت على الخليه ما بتكاثر, مش هيك؟ عشان هيك كنا نحكي عن هذول اللي ماتوا الله يرحمهم بالمستشفيات and so on. هذول ما بنقولوا الميتين الفيروس الا اذا اجى يعني احنا لمسنا الميت ولمسنا الفيروس وحطيناه على our respiratory tract and so on. فلازم نعرف احنا المود of transmission and how disease is transmitted is extremely important to understand disease process and the prevention that's going to be associated with that.
يعطيك العافية دكتور.
أهلين عمر.
دكتور لو سمحت.
تفضل.
يعني I have the 10th edition of the book, so can I use it?
عفوا مش سامعك.
I have the 10th edition of the book. Can I use it?
Yeah, sure. As long as it covers the main objectives of the lecture, yes, sure. زي ما حكيت يعني احنا we prefer to use the latest edition. يعني latest edition بيكون في the most up-to-date information related to the development of that particular science. As long as يعني مثلا الكتاب الجديد هذا طلعت عليه انا اللي هو ال 11th, هذا طلع بال 2019 بينما مثلا 10th اديشن طلع بال 2015. يعني في حوالي 4 سنين يعني ديفرنس. بنفضل احنا الليتست اديشن. ما عندك استخدم التنت ما في مشكله، يعني تقريبا more than 95% similarity اذا مش اكثر بيكون.
Alright, thank you so much.
Sure.
الله يعطيك العافية دكتور.
الله يعافيك يا حمزة.
هو مش سؤال بس بدي أطلب طلب، ممكن السلايدات تنزلنا إياهم اليوم مش نستنى للمحاضرة الجاي؟
على طول هلا
يعني حتى لو ما كملنا الملف عشان بس ندرس الجزء اللي أعطيتنا إياه اليوم.
خلاص ولا يهمك. هلا هلا هو قاعد بسجل التسجيل هذا، بس ربع ساعة بس يخلص التسجيل بحطه على الاي ليرنينج ولا يهمك.
تمام. الله
then we will
يعطيك العافية.
الله يعافيك. we will call it a day. وشكرا كثير لاستماعكم. وهذا كلام سجل كمان على الفيسبوك وراح يضل موجود في الفيسبوك، يعني في الجروب تبعكم لايف. وانا راح احط كمان زي ما حكينا هذا التسجيل على الاي ليرنينج. وبنشوفكم يوم الثلاثاء ان شاء الله. شكرا لكم والله يعطيكم العافيه.
يعطيك العافية دكتور.
اهلا
يعطيك العافية.
اهلا يا هلا.